I'm Dr. Pete Economo, the East Coast psychologist,
And I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin, the West Coast psychologist.
and this is When East
Meets West.
Can you believe this is our midsummer break episode, Nikki?
I mean, I can't. It's like I can, and that as always, I'm like, yeah, I could use a break. That sounds nice. But I can't believe I can't believe we're halfway through, more than halfway through the year already.
Where does the time go?
I don't know. When you're living mindfully day at a time, it's just
It
time
just comes and it
just
goes.
comes and it goes. Yeah.
Well, I'm thrilled, and we all need a little bit more love. And so today we're going to talk about love.
I love that we're talking about it. I can already see we're gonna terribly make that joke about 45 more times in the
Probably more you than me.
That is fair and accurate. But so I'm gonna make that joke a lot.
Yeah, you're going to make that joke a lot, and I'm going to define it. And love
Great.
is, as a noun, an intense feeling of deep affection.
What is that? Oxford's time?
Yeah.
Where are we at?
Oxford.
I'm not super into that definition.
Well, how are we going to talk about it behaviorally? So why don't you give me why don't you operationalize it?
I think, okay, well, it's not a behavior, obviously. I mean, we can act in loving ways, but I think as an emotion, I think it's both an emotion and a value.
Yeah.
I think it can be both. And I think as an emotion, it's like, I think that definition doesn't capture it deeply enough. You know what I mean? I think that love, when we feel it, it's a really thorough, nourishing, warm, connected feeling. Like it's got all those aspects to it. Like we certainly feel affection as well, but I feel, I don't mean this as a judgment. I feel like that definition is like too surface a little bit. It's like a little too shallow.
Well, it's probably shallow well,
You're
because
like, I think that's right. Yeah.
I think that's right. Well, because maybe they're not, like with Oxford, they're not thinking about psychological Western behavioral science, where we're going to also think about love as like that first connection. What is that? The sensitive time. Remember that from like developmental psychology? The sensitive period.
Oh, sure. Yes. Yes. I'm like, the recesses of my mind. Yeah, I can pull that out a little bit.
It's there somewhere.
Yeah.
But for our listeners, it's this idea that like, that's where some of the trauma research or attachment theory comes from, that says like those attachment styles from childhood, from birth and even pre-birth, like prenatally, I think it was like to 12 months or 18 months or something, like 3 years.
Who knows? I don't remember.
Either way, there's like this formative time of the critical period, they call it. And love is a big piece of that, and just trying to feel,
Well, it is. And I think, this is where the Western science comes in, is that we could talk a little bit about the evolutionary function of it, because as we've always talked about as humans, humans, we do, I hate to say we do get a little narcissistic as a species, right? And we think we're the only ones that feel that, but anybody with an animal, anybody that's observed animals feel love too. And it's like, why? Well, what Pete's really talking about is the bonding that happens. And obviously when we love, there's a lot of benefits to that, right? Like we get to feel, like I said, connection is nourishing. It helps us to regulate, actually like stress hormones, right? Like we, when we feel connected to other beings, that can keep us safe, right? We can work together. There's like a lot of benefits to feeling love.
Yeah. In fact, some of the neurological research finds that like even thinking about a love moment can create dopamine, and it will mimic the actual event. And, like breastfeeding is another opportunity of dopamine and that love connection.
Well, and I think this is important to bring this in, is we should probably talk about the love chemical as it's known, which is oxytocin, right? And so,
oh my God, that's what I meant. No, I didn't mean dopamine.
I was literally like, oh, cool, dopamine's released too. Amazing.
No, oxytocin.
Well,
my bad.
I always forget my neurotransmitters, but oxytocin
How
is when I
dare
don't.
you producers let me come on air and say that? Yeah, oxytocin. Thank you for that, Dr. Rubin.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So oxytocin is known as the love chemical, and that chemical is released during breastfeeding, during childbirth, during sex. And then my favorite, I think we talked about this in the dogs and well-being, I'll say it again, is that when you pet an animal, oxytocin is released in the animal's brain and in your
ours.
brain. Yes. And what it does is it helps us to bond emotionally. And that's really powerful, right? That's a really powerful chemical. And also, again, like I always say, evolution doesn't do things for no reason, right? Like it's selected for this because this helps our well-being, that we as human beings we do need love. We need connection. We're designed that way.
I also think evolutionarily it leads to procreation, which allows for the species to, to carry on, which is important.
Yes, which is important. And we talked about this in our sex and connection episode. Of course, like, you can feel love and not have sex, right? You can have sex and not feel love. And there's different kinds, there's all different kinds of love. There's romantic love. There's, I think the word is companionate love, I think is what they call it, like friendship love. The love that love between parent and child or between siblings, right?
Yeah. Well, there's enduring love, familiar love, playful love, obsessive love, affectionate love, selfless love. So there's all different types.
Love towards oneself, maybe we should throw in there.
Self-compassion,
right?
self-love.
Self-love, right? Self-love. Yeah. So, I mean, it's funny as we're talking, I'm like, I feel the warm and fuzzies actually, because then I think because
I love you.
Yes, I love you too, and I think that Pete and I mean that, by the way. We're very close. And I think that maybe speaks to the part about it's not just an emotion, but it's a value. And of course, values are tied to feelings too. But like, I don't know, Pete, what would you say about love as a value potentially? I mean, again, not everybody has to value it, but it certainly can be one.
And what I'm feeling like we're focusing on is like relationship. And so that's why I like you brought in self-love. It could be love for a stranger, it could be love for someone I've never even met.
Yeah.
And those are, I think that really would contribute to well-being. And that's why the, mindfulness and what I'll bring in some Buddhism stuff in a moment. Please. But that's why I think that I think that's why those individuals live like healthier, happier lives, because they're truly practicing that.
Well, and you're, as per usual, reading my mind when you're saying I'm about to bring in the Eastern stuff, because, in my learning of Eastern practices, including definitely in my mindfulness practice and yoga practice, one thread that I've always really connected with is like everything is love, and I want to say that it's not meant in a cheesy way. It's like not meant in like, I feel like there's a very common, I don't know if in other Western countries they say this, but in the United States, at least, it's like love conquers all is like a kind of a phrase. And I always say like, that's not true. Love does not conquer all, right? Love does not conquer all. Love, you can love somebody or something and someone can hurt you, or there can be things that don't work or whatever. And I think that the spiritual concept of everything is love is different. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about sort of that.
Well, in Buddhism, so it's interesting because again, in that example, we're thinking about romance a bit too. And so Buddhism doesn't really, there's no, like, it's not a sacrament of marriage. Like there's no place for marriage necessarily. I mean, two people could choose to marry because that's their value, which you were bringing in. That's like the Western behavioral science. But in general, Buddhism is just looking at if two people are like connecting, letting go of their ego, just being in the moment, like that's really the goal. And the philosophy really is about just creating joy in the union.
Yes. Well, and then I think that's maybe where like maybe this concept of like everything is love is like it wouldn't it also be about like connection to things like joy? I feel like it's another aspect of it, but like connection.
See, that's where I struggle. And I've actually talked to my teacher a lot about this because, I don't talk, Nikki and I don't talk a ton about ourselves on here. I am in a, long-term marriage and I don't get it in the context of Buddhism because there's non-attachment. So when you're saying that, so the context piece here is love is for this moment.
Right. Yes.
And joy can be created together or separate. So love is really, so there wouldn't be anything that you would want to attach to. And that's where I struggle because, and I'm sure there's gotta be a listener with me out there, because how do you actually then enter marriage without being attached to that person or to this feeling or to love?
It's so funny. It's like, I don't know. I mean, I struggle. Let me clarify, but I struggle with plenty of things and have struggled with plenty of things in terms of attached to things. For some reason, this has always made just so much sense to me. And I think it's because it's this idea of like the radical acceptance that we never know. It's like, we can never attach to what will be. So it's like, even like with commitment, it's like but what I what I like, I don't know, like intuitively connect with, I guess maybe the best way to say is that, but we can commit to this, what's happening in this moment and
That's
what
right.
we do. And that opens up this freedom to experience what's happening in this moment. And
That's right.
And love is available, you know, in
Yeah.
all these different ways. And love is available again, like if we this back to the sort of like love is everything, it's like you can feel love like looking at the ocean, as I often do, right?
Yes.
So you can feel
Nature,
love.
yes.
Yeah, you can feel love, you know, reflecting on your childhood self and feeling compassion for that little person, you know?
Well, and I'm reminded, I think I got this from you, that I think I've heard you say there's infinite amounts of love.
I do say that. Yeah.
You do.
I do say that. Yeah. Yeah.
Which I remember that. So maybe say something about that.
Yeah. I always think about, you know, that there's an infinite amount of love in the world. And this is true of any value that, so obviously this brings back in why I think love is also a value, not just an emotion, that there's no point in time where we're like, I felt enough love, like I've achieved love, or I've loved my partner enough, or I've loved my best friend enough, or I've loved the ocean enough.
I got to a 10, so now
I got to a 10. It's just like, it's a bottomless well. And you know, and I think what I'm always like, you know, I mean, it sounds cheesy, but like personally moved by is that when there are certain times where I think like, I can't love somebody more, and then I love them more. I mean, sort of, you know, maybe like it's not a silly example, but an example maybe I think about a lot are like my best friends from college, right?
Yeah,
so we,
absolutely.
you know, so we were very close, and you know, I've known these people now about 20 years, a little over 20 years, and I just think like I have just loved these people, this group of people, like for so like since I met them. I mean, it was one of those things we always joke like we just like all fell in love, you know, we love, and every year I love them more deeply. It doesn't go the other way. Yeah.
No. Yeah. And I think that's, well, so I'll read a quote because I think it's also important from a behavioral. I want to link this to behavioral science because the other thing is, I imagine people are there. Love is not always easy. And that's important for everyone to know.
That's right. That's
because even parents, like sometimes, like I was talking to my mom and I was just like, oh, is she done yet? Like I just, you know, like finding myself.
Because love doesn't conquer all. That's what we say. Like love is it's always available. It doesn't, but it's not like paper covers rock. It doesn't, you know, it's not
rock, paper, scissors, shoot.
Yeah. It's like, you also might be like really angry at the same time. Like that's, you know,
you have to throw in your dialectic. It wouldn't be an episode if we didn't.
Of course.
So when you like a flower, you just pluck it. But when you love a flower, you water it daily. And I want us to think about that from that perspective, because that's really how you create joy. Because that's what I'll say to, I find I've said this to clients where it's like, hey, it's a lot easier to stay stagnant and unhappy. Mm-hmm. It's a lot more work to create joy and peace.
And love, which they go together and connect and connect.
Hence the title.
Hence the title. Yeah. Well, but it's also, they're all interrelated, like emotions and experiences. That's right. It's like, and you know, I know I've said this many times in this podcast that, you know, it's like this quote unquote secret of the universe, but it's not, because, you know, the Eastern traditions have talked about this for thousands of years. It's like, there's infinite amounts of that available to us. Yeah. We can only access it if we are first willing to radically accept and experience what we don't want.
That's right.
So the more you're saying, I just want to feel love, I just want to feel joy, I just want to feel connection, it's like, it's out of reach. Like you can't get it because life is filled with pain and struggle at the same time.
And you have to feel the pain and struggle in order to actually create joy.
Yes. And connect with love and to feel peace and grounded. Right. Yeah. And so that's where it's like, you know, it's always there. It's like everything. It's an infinite amount. There's an infinite amount. It just takes effort and work to access it and cultivate it.
Which is why we always praise and preach self-care.
Yes.
And that could maybe bring us, as we're coming to the end, is about this midsummer break, because that's really our commitment. That's our commitment to love.
Yes, and that is our commitment to love and love for ourselves, and you know, and it's maybe important to say too that, you know, that is maybe one of the hardest practices for people, is that there are lots of people, I'm sure you hear this clinically all the time, where they say like, I can love other people or animals, but I can't love myself. And I think, you know, that is just such a hard practice, but we are deserving and in need of the same like behavior and emotional connection to ourselves as we provide to other people, you know. And it's probably worth mentioning, like there's, you know, loving kindness meditations known as metta, you know, in Buddhist practice that help cultivate self-compassion, compassion, love for oneself and others. And, I love those meditations.
There it is.
I knew it was coming.
I knew it would be you.
Yeah, I knew it was going to come. It was going to come again. But I encourage listeners to check some of those out if they're struggling with that personally.
Yeah. And so this is also our own midsummer break for also love of one another, because, as co-hosts, we just need to ensure that we're both healthy, take a little time so that we can, recharge our batteries. And, we are going to miss everybody, but we are thrilled to come back, for part 2, season 2. So stay tuned and tune in. And I'll leave you with this. True love is born from understanding.
This has been When East Meets West. I'm Dr. Pete Economo.
And I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin. Be present, be brave.
This has been When East Meets West. All material is based on opinion and educational training of Drs. Pete Economo and Nikki Rubin.
Content is for informational and educational purposes only.